Why this recession is bad. So, what makes the current recession so bad? Other downturns have been more painful by some measures, but none since World War II has delivered so many severe blows to the economy at the same time. Perhaps this is different from all the rest, and already it is the longest. The nonprofit National Bureau of Economic Research, which determines when the U.S. economy slips into recession, says the downturn began in December 2007, 19 months ago. That makes it longer than the wrenching 16-month recessions of 1973 to 75 and 1981 to 82. The unemployment rate is approaching the peak seen in the 1981-82 recession, and the scope of job losses is the worst since the 1948 to 49 recession. And the decline in gross domestic product, or GDP, is the deepest since the 1957 to 58 downturn. And Americans haven't seen so much of their wealth evaporate since the Great Depression. So yes, this recession, depression, whatever have you call it, is different from all the rest. The NBER defines a recession as a significant decline in economic activity spread across the economy, lasting more than a few months. And among the gauges the organization watches are employment and GDP, as well as income, sales, and industrial output. So even if the current recession is, as some economists believe, bottoming out, it already looks worse than its post-war predecessors. With a dwindling number of people who remember the Great Depression, the 1981-82 recession is many Americans' high-water mark for economic pain. To tame that era's rampant inflation, the Federal Reserve pushed short-term interest rates above 20%, slamming the brakes on the economy. Millions lost their jobs, pushing the jobless rate to 10.8%. Last month, the employment rate hit at least 9.5%. But most economists forecast it will keep climbing even after the recession ends, because many businesses will remain cautious about hiring. And making matters worse, the economy needs to add at least 100,000 jobs a month just to keep pace with population growth. And somehow that's not likely to happen. In other words, how can you have an economic recovery if you're losing hundreds of thousands of jobs each and every month, month after month? It's just not really going to happen. And while the unemployment rate isn't quite as high as in the early 1980s, the job losses associated with this recession already have been deeper, because the downturn started with a lower unemployment rate than in the 1981 to 82 recession. Last month, there were 6.7 million fewer Americans working than in December 2007. And that's a lot. When employment peaked a 4.7% decline, compared with just 3.1% in 1981 to 82. In terms of employment, we're now way past 1982, and we're just about to cross the worst post-war recession, which was 1948, says Stanford University economist Bob Hall. who heads the NBER's recession dating group. And in 1948, the demand that built up during World War II rationing programs had been sated. Companies, left holding more inventory than they could sell, cut back production and laid off workers. The recession that began that year pushed payrolls down by 5.2%. Jobs recovered quickly, however, after the excess inventory was cleared away. In contrast, the past two recessions, in 1990 to 91 and in 2001, saw payrolls decline long after the economy began recovering. That lagging drop is a shift in the way jobs respond to downturns, but economists worry will continue. Recent downturns have also been less abrupt, in part because the manufacturing sector, which responds to trouble by cutting production, is no longer as large a part of the economy. In other words, the United States they're not making things much anymore. The manufacturing sector is disappearing. It's turning into a service sector economy. With declines in GDP, the value of all goods and services produced, associated with the 1990 to 91 and 2001 recessions, were slight. That makes this recession's decline in GDP striking, very striking. Through the first quarter, GDP was down 3.1% from the peak it reached last year. The only post-World War II recession more severe was in 1958, back when the United States was a manufacturing powerhouse. After consumer spending cooled in response to Fed rate increases, manufacturers cut back, sending GDP down 3.7%. A normal post-war recession ends when the Fed thinks it's done enough to fight inflation, said an economic historian at the University of California, Berkeley. But this downturn is different. This downturn was set off by a housing and credit collapse, making Fed rate cuts much less effective and spurring growth. Economists believe the latest GDP report will show that the economy contracted again in the second quarter, and that in combination with downward government data revisions could make this recession's GDP drop even larger in 1958. In other words, there's some fundamental problems with the present day economy. Huge fundamental problems. And yes, again, greed, pure greed, has brought this all upon us. And this recession has eaten away at Americans' wealth like never before. Falling home prices have decreased the equity households have in their homes. That is, the value of their homes minus what they owe on them, by at least $5.1 trillion, a 41% drop. They also have lost trillions of dollars in the stock market. No other episode of wealth destruction since the 1930s even comes close. Yes, and once again, there's something much more going on here. Something bigger, much bigger. Like I said, there are huge fundamental problems with the U.S. economy. The United States doesn't manufacture things like they used to. Too much importing goods from overseas. And also an economy based on oil and oil consumption. And an economy that uses a quarter of all the world's resources. When the population of the United States is much less compared to other countries. Anyway, once again, These are more signs of the end times, transition days, and the transition is happening day by day all around the world.